Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crystal Water Experience podcast with me, Dr. Jo Whitaker, where every week I bring in a subject matter expert and information that is not mainstream. We're learning, aren't we, that there's a lot of information outside of the mainstream news and narrative, and this is being brought to you on podcasts and in books, and we're going to be talking about one of those today. But it's very important to get the message from the actual messenger rather than through these third parties, and that's what I aim to do on this podcast. I am absolutely delighted to bring Dr. Dave Cartland in today. You might have heard about this guy over the last few years and what he's been through, but with his own words, we're going to share that story with you. And at the end, really, I want you to see how much resilience and what a hero this guy is for speaking out. And hopefully you can see that in your own life and you can work out what you can do to make a difference. Because Dave, you've definitely made a difference. Thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
No, thanks for having me, Joe. It's an absolute pleasure. It's a bit of a somber tale to tell, but let's tell it nonetheless. And there are lots of positives to come out of it as well. Obviously, speaking out comes with the warning that you don't actually receive at medical school, other than a gentle whistleblow when you're finished.
Yeah, that's exactly. So, in what year did you find out that when you're a doctor, you're not allowed to say truthful things if it's disagreed with by the medical establishment? Otherwise, that's it, you're finished. What year did you figure that out?
In general terms, without picking out a date, it's back at med school, looking back, this is a retrospective analysis. I talk about this in my book, which we'll talk about later, but it's the comparison between 2 degrees that I did. So the first degree was one in biomedical science, focusing on a lot of immunology, virology, which is a contentious subject, I know. You're taught to question, critique, appraise, even when you're looking at peer-reviewed literature, that you need to look at where the funding streams are, where the conflicts are. And that's what you taught. But then you end up in this medical school scenario. And I always say the degree is called medicine. So straight off the bat, you know it's going to be about drugs, medicine, the clues in the title. I now call medical school the indoctrination centre. But like I say, I went through the process. I did the graduate entry course following a first class degree in the biomedical sciences and followed the flock, really, and watched the BBC. Sadly, I hate to admit that. And just went through med school learning the lectures, and this is medicine. And you were given subtle warnings along the way. You get one lecture on vaccines, for example, absolutely nothing about immunology, but you're gently warned at the time. And they use the phrase like a verb. It's you get Wakefielded. If you say anything other than safe and effective, you will be Wakefielded. You'd be marched out the door. So that was one of the things that I think back to. Maybe I was asleep to that indoctrination through the med school. This is the guideline. This is the rule. This is the algorithm, and follow it or else. But going to the pandemic itself, again, I was working in the Midlands at the time. As you can tell, I've got a Brummie accent that I've struggled to lose down in Cornwall. And went along with it. In terms of, we were told by the TV that there's this pandemic, this deadly virus, and just the initial signs for me were just dodgy. The coverage, the things about testing, some weird rules coming out, rules of 6, rules of 8, bubbles. You're okay in a pub if you have a steak meal in front of you, but if you stand up, you're attacked by the particle of black smoke that the bit. So there was all of that. But for me, it really came after the vaccines were given. That was my eureka moment. It probably would, again, I've lost track of time. When the first jab went in, not so much of a warning signal. The odd person would come to me and say, look, the vaccines cause this, that, and the other symptoms. Second jab, again, there was a little ripple, but it was when those boosters went in, the third one, it's almost like it had to be given as a 3 to cause absolute carnage. But that was my moment, because I worked in a little surgery in Cornwall where footfall's low, patient numbers are low in terms of our patient list. And every day I'd see 2, 3, 4 people questioning the injection, as I'm going to call it, and saying, I've developed this, that, and the other, seeing young people with stroke symptoms, strange neurology, some inflammatory symptoms, and chest pains in 20-year-olds turning out to be myocarditis. So that was really my eureka moment. And it was across all the platforms that I worked at: primary care, urgent care, some of the A&E shifts I did historically. And that was my eureka moment. People coming to me, not me digging out of them the vaccine, the injection had harmed them. And then you start looking back, don't you, and retrospectively analysing everything from the silly rules, as I mentioned, the tests. What are these tests? What they're actually picking up? But then it goes further. It goes further. Just outside of the pandemic, you're looking at, a pill for every ill principle. You don't want to cure a patient because that's a customer lost type principle. I often see our big pharmacy in town where I live queuing around the corner, people walking out with luggage case sizes of drugs. And I've seen it myself in practice. You get a drug, it causes a side effect. There's a drug for that side effect. And then that drug causes a side effect, and so you're on another pill. And the other thing for me was the lack of what I'm learning now. I've got a load of books next to me that you can't see that are about naturopathy, naturopathic alternatives, nutrition, energy, things that you're just not taught in medical school. And that's a red flag for me now. Why are we not taught nutrition at medical school? Why are we not taught about a lot of the things I've researched about injections, childhood injections, let's say? It's just, there's so much unknown about it, yet claims of safety and efficacy, we've heard it all before, made about things that we just simply haven't tested for. Yeah, but a sort of general eureka moment, really, over the years.
I think that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, especially because I had forgotten that you did a biomedical degree first. And so my journey was I did my PhD in genetic vaccines, as people know, and my first degree is in genetics and microbiology, a master's degree in oncology. After then, I went to work, I've been working for universities and even the NHS, a company called NHS Innovations, which is like a spin-off, which the idea was is if medical staff had really great ideas, but were very early on back in the fag packet, because there wasn't really there wasn't any research funding really going into the NHS. It's all private research from external sources, and the medical people help out with whatever studies there are. They're not really their own studies unless they've attached to a university. And what I noticed when I worked for NHS Innovations, that the actual discipline of science is not in medicine. And I kept saying to people, just because one's called a doctor and one called a doctor, they're completely different disciplines. It's like having a plumber and an electrician. You wouldn't have your plumber doing your electrics. They probably can know some of the fancy words, but you wouldn't have it, and you certainly wouldn't get it kind of signed off and certified. And there was a particular incident happened where it was a professor and his medical staff who said, we've published this paper on this combination of drug and it reduces post-surgical infection. And he said, and we would like to patent it. And it's gone into going to remind me, like the Lancet. That's what it was, the Lancet. And I said, if it's already gone into the Lancet, you already will have disclosed that formulation. So you can't patent it anymore because it's in the public domain. And he said, oh no, we didn't disclose in the Lancet what the formulation was. And I said, how did you get your paper published? When you said we injected some of A and some of B, but we're not going to tell you how much it is. We then gave it to people and then this happened. And as I was reviewing lots and lots of science in the Lancet, BMJ and things like that, it wasn't science. And most of it wasn't because they're not taught this. And I actually taught when I was on my PhD, a couple of undergraduate medical students in immunology, and it was a 2-hour lecture I gave.
Well, you look at the whole peer review process as well. It's corruption. It's sold to the highest bidder. It's worth on every single paper. Look at the conflict of interest before you go ahead, because you have to follow the money in these things. And I've been in between the 2 degrees. I did a master's where I'm pretty much being told what the research will find, wink, wink, kind of thing, and it was just corrupt. So I couldn't really get involved in that. So I left to join the indoctrination centre / medical school.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I couldn't carry on my PhD after because I was like, why are some people getting funding and not others? And it was very clear that you were given, and this changed actually during my time, whereas scientists couldn't choose their own things to study anymore. You had to go to a group. It's only people have to understand this, it's a very small group of people deciding what research happens in this country and many places over the world.
And they've got greasy palms.
And most of those people are then are funded by pharmaceutical companies.
Well, you know, with the gene injection papers I've got a massive catalogue of papers that prove my position. They don't make it past preprint ever. So that's one of the criticisms when people say, oh, you just quoting non-peer-reviewed preprints. And then you look at, there's a big autopsy study, wasn't there, that was done. It showed the damage that this did, and that was retracted. So you've got retractions and they're not getting into the papers to start with, and anything that was opposite the narrative. And so people aren't going to, in the scientific world, they're not going to see that side of the coin, and it becomes a unilateral narrative.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Who owns these papers and the peer review process itself? For the people that don't know, peer review means that you have carried out and written up the experiment in the correct way. It doesn't mean it works, by the way, and this is what a lot of people don't understand. But what happens is if you're in a particular research area, when you write your paper, it will go to your competitors who are competing, by the way, for the same funding as you are. And because they're the only experts that know, but also your greatest competitors. And they come back with comments and they'll tell you to change graphs or tell you haven't done it properly. So already there's politics, there's money involved in the whole peer review process. And then there's this idea that actually universities and professors, etc., that are actually applying for the funding, you only get your next tranche of funding if you get published in specific research journals. If you get published in what they call low impact journals, even if it's true, they don't count it. So there's a handful of people deciding what research, there's a handful of places that you can publish, or you don't get money. And a lot of people don't realise this, that most scientists are not on full-time tenured jobs until they're in their 40s. So they have mortgages to pay. There's a huge financial pressure on people to get papers published.
The rock goes even higher. So if you look at the medical profession and its regulators, the nursing profession and the regulators, so I can only comment on the GMC. So one of the things I was told, they were a charity regulator, neutral. They were there to obviously maintain patients' safety, etc., and the reputation of the profession. And then you look into their investment portfolio and they invest in big pharma. They invest in AstraZeneca. So there's me as an anti-gene injection doctor going against one of the brands that they invest in. Now, they didn't invest with my permission as a subscriber and paying my 50 quid a month. They did it anyway. They invest in Merck, Big Pharma. They invest in Nestle. I think they invest in Coca-Cola or Pepsi or one of those acidic drinks. And just how can a charity regulator be neutral and have no conflict of interest when they're investing in Big Pharma? And then you got all these doctors speaking out against the injection. They're never going to stand a chance, are they?
No, absolutely not. And very quickly, I was shut down because I knew that even science of these, we were just talking before that, I still thought other vaccines were okay until I read RFK's book, The Real Anthony Fauci. And this is because even when you're in science, you're taught one side of the coin. You're not taught, it's not that this stuff isn't even there and it's published. So when this came out, I already knew what was going to happen because of the amount of research obviously I'd done in this area. It was a long time ago, but it's still research. So for instance, I knew that, and this is peer-reviewed published research, that you can't just get a genetic injection, put it in your arm, and it's going to stay in your arm. And I remember hearing them saying, "No, don't worry, it just stays in your arm." I'm like, it doesn't. A very small percentage of it does, and the rest is potluck where it ends up. And then they were saying it would never integrate into your DNA. And I was like, you literally get taught on day one about electroporation and how DNA can get in your body's electrical circuit. So that's not true. And then I was working in these labs where grade two, oh, what's the word I'm just looking for now, where we was doing sterile techniques. I was like, you can't just wear a mask and it starts. And I wore a mask for a bit, right, just to make up, because I thought that mandate meant you had to do it. And this is the reason. And I didn't want to upset people. Now I know that mandate does not mean you have to do anything. But most people are not taught the correct English language. But the whole, I say this very often, academia is extremely corrupt. And that's the science that underpins then
Yeah,
what the
and you
medical.
look at academia and you look at medics, for example. Again, a little book plug again is that I talk about this. I call it Medical Zombies, the chapter. And actually, our medical school positively selects these people. They've got perfectionist traits, they've got straight A's all through their schooling. And actually, I wasn't that clever to get through to medical school. I could just read a book and photographic memory and all that and spiel it out at the right times under time pressure. And so you're positively selecting all of these people who were captain of that team and flute specialist and or trombone specialist and achieved all this stuff. And then you put them into this cohort where there's no critical thinking and there's just follow the crowd. There's a herd mentality. And we saw that as well as the threat that if you're holding out doctors like Dr. Cartland, Dr. Armstrong, Dr. Adil, Dr. Myhill, and all the dissenters, all the bad boys and girls of the recent era then. Yeah, they make it deliberately uncomfortable and prohibitive. They don't. No one wants to speak out, and I hear this all the time. They tapped me on the shoulder in person, and the surgeries I've worked at most recently before the strike off. But telling me commendable, but we won't speak out because even yesterday I had 3 messages from 3 doctors, all in different areas of medicine, saying, "Well done for speaking out. Let me commend you, but we've seen what they've done to you." So it's work to treat the prohibitive effect of slapping people on the wrist. But yeah, academics are not as academic as they think themselves, or critical thinkers, and they've shown that in the last 5 years in particular. But
absolutely.
I don't see a lot of debate. You just get ad hominem, really, which is that's all they have back in the locker. I'd love to have a debate with the doctor. I'd love to sit down and have a debate properly without knowing that there's going to be expletives and name calling, but it doesn't seem to happen.
This would seem to be like a language of shutting people down, name calling, and social media is really toxic for that. So when this started happening, you started speaking out. How did that affect you? Did it really shock you just how vile people can be just because you're not towing the line?
Yeah, and what shocked me the most is the people who are being vile are from within a sector claiming to be caring. That's what they are, healthcare workers. And I looked at a lot of my complaints. I did an FOI at the end of proceedings to see how many complaints had come in. And I think it was about 250 without remembering the exact figure. And you're looking, and they're mostly doctors or nurses, snitches, as I call them now. Have a conversation. We're all adults. If you think no one in my locality, for example, reached out and called me and said, "Look, get off social media. It's not good for you," or "This is heading one way or the other." But yeah, it's just I find that the medical profession have disappointed me in terms of how vile they can be. A lot of my trolls on social media, turns out when you identify them that they are senior, very senior medics, particularly in my locality, there's a group of them, and I'm quite vicious with it. All I've got is my criminal views on good medical ethics, my even more criminal views on patient safety, particularly children and pregnant women. I was championing evidence-based medicine and debate. That's another crime. And honouring bodily autonomy. That's all I did. And then I spoke out briefly about masks, lockdowns, their futility, the collateral damage thereof. And finally, the vaccine injuries started to happen. And you can't deny the evidence that you're seeing and hearing yourself. Now, I didn't get a bout of ostrich syndrome that was doing the rounds at the same time as COVID-19. A lot of my colleagues have, and they even now they're queuing up for their number 7, 8, 9. They must be aware if they saw anything like I saw. Bearing in mind, I wasn't looking for it. It came into my room, and I saw it on football pitches, people collapsing on me.
Remember that? There were so many on football pitches.
It happened on my football pitch. There's a local lad who I've just actually bumped into on the refereeing circuit. Collapsed, peri-arrest on the pitch. He'd had his jab days before. He'd had chest pain ever since his first one, and then ended up almost arresting on me. Had to get the defibrillator out, and he'd had his jab a few days prior. And when these things, these rare coincidences keep happening, they're no longer by definition rare coincidences. They're patterns, and then you get told they're just cases, or case reports aren't strong scientific evidence. But when there's thousands and thousands of case reports, and when you can't get them into the press and get meta-analyses done or Cochrane reviews, then you're never going to get that side of the story. You just need people need to listen to the dissenters, really, and ask why. Why are they dissenting? Why are people taking time out to go onto Amazon and writing crap reviews for my book for no reason other than maliciousness? They're just making idiots of themselves because they've not even bought the book. It's blatant to see what's motivating these people. So I thought I'd be positive. I'm going to be positive now for the rest.
Yeah, but I think that's a really important thing you said, because it was a shock to me as well. Even though family members and friends, even have seen my degree, they've even read what I wrote, and it was all in this area, right? And then they started to think I was being mentally ill, and that maybe I wasn't mentally fit to look after my children, and would be putting the phone down on me. And it really surprised me. But I think this is like what happens to you then. What do you then choose to do? Because what I found was I didn't find anybody else awake, by the way, not one single person awake for another 18 months. So it was a very kind of lonely place. I haven't found Telegram because I came off social media because I was getting such abuse. And what I did is I went very much into myself and thought, I've got nothing to lose now, because pretty much all my friends and family and the whole world's gone mad. I've got nothing to lose. The only thing I can do now is fight, because I've lost everything. And so I built again from a different platform. So I tore everything down and started again. And now I've never had so many friends. I've never had such a positive relationship with my family. I've never had a positive, because everything's now coming full circle. And I don't go, see, I was right. What I worked out was, like you've gone, the natural medicine and how to detox. Because once you have that, you've got the people still banging on. Oh, they're ill all the time, every 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh, I'm never ill. Oh, that's really good. You're very lucky. I goes, don't think it's luck.
I think so that's the difference to the two sides of the debate. I think there's aggression and vileness and trolling on that side, very forceful censorship as well.
Yeah.
Again, with the censorship, you've got to ask questions why? Why is this little Cornish GP down here got A, such a massive following, and B, why have they censored him so hard? These people went for everything. They've after the GMC, I thought I'd be left alone. But they've gone, they contact FA to ruin my £10 an hour refereeing hobby, child services calling, we've had an anonymous call, all the rest of it, and they contacted surgeries, neighbours, friends, ex-partners, friends, colleagues, etc. So that's one side of reality, and we've got to accept that. And I think, like you just said, once you've lost everything, you find out who your real friends are, but you make a very dangerous foe in somebody who's lost everything because they come out fighting. But we, on our side, I think I see a lot of love. I see a lot of caring. We spend our days reading books to help patients. I get loads of people who have been gaslit and kicked out of their GP surgery, told it's all in the head or functional, and they've got full-on multi-systemic inflammatory symptoms and left to it. And then I spend half my days researching everyone else's protocols, the evidence base behind it, and start getting people to research for themselves. And there's only one motive for that: help them, help them. No, the trolls will troll. That's the thing. They're going to do what they do. But in the background, we've got to be there for what you just said, those people who've come full circle and those people who originally kicked you out of their life and then realised because of the amount of funerals they're going to or the amount of ill health perpetually that they're at the sticky end of, or that in our village with funerals every bloody 2 minutes. And so people are noticing that all their friends are real. And then you've got to compare that to the fact that none of the NHS staff are having these things anymore. I
Yeah.
think the uptake for COVID jabs has plummeted. It's almost zero now, 20% maybe at best. And the flu jab uptake is about a quarter. They're all panicking now, saying this is not a good sell. The doctors aren't taking the flu jab as well now. So again, my question is, what are the doctors seeing? What are the doctors experiencing to not to say no when they're offered that wonderful life-saving flu injection?
Can I ask your opinion on something? Like, for what I know of working in the NHS and responsibility and contracts and things like this, when push comes to shove and this comes out, the doctors are going to be, and the doctors and the nurses that give this are going to be fully responsible. The government and the pharmaceutical industry and all those people and in their insurance is not going to take any liability. Because at the end of the day, it's always down to the person doing it to make sure that it's the right thing to do with the information they've got. And this is the reason why me and many others took notices round to the different doctors' surgeries, because we realised that people didn't know. But when you've served them a notice and say, this is all the evidence, now they did know. And I think they're going to find it very shocking, but I think it's absolutely coming that they're going to be found personally responsible and they will have their houses and they will have their money taken off them. This is what's coming. It's not going to be quick, but it's going to come.
It's going to come, and you look up the chain, everyone else has taken legal liability. They're using an emergency use authorization. All the big companies, Pfizer, Moderna, Zeneca, have got no liability for this. And it comes down the chain, unfortunately, to the person pressing the syringe. And I think part of this is why they got volunteers. Every man and his dog was having a crack at making these vaccinator injection efforts.
Yeah, yeah.
I think my second injection, it was from, there was a load of firemen giving the jabs out in the centre while I was there.
Mm,
I got a doctor, but I asked the doctor what it was. They don't know that it's a different technology. They keep calling that, using the V word.
yeah,
And then you just say things like, it's not, it's a gene-based
yeah.
therapeutic. I loosely use the word therapeutic because there's not anything therapeutic about it. Do you know what mRNA is? Do you understand the technology underpinning this? That your body becomes a cellular factory for the antigen, the spike protein. Do you know there's no off switch, or we don't even know? You'd have thought before we injected man, woman, and child and pregnant woman that we'd know that this only lasts for a couple of hours. I was told it stays in my arm for a couple of hours and melts away. One glance at the Pfizer documentation from their own trial shows the biodistribution's wide and, as you said, variable. So it's expressed essentially in every cell of your body for God knows how long, and you become a spike protein factory. And then we're seeing the kind of consequences of that in its pathophysiology. And if you said any of this to a doctor who had been jabbing, they look at you like you've got two heads. They look at you like you need to be sectioned, and you just say, look, it says it on the packet. It's an mRNA suspension. We're not even going to touch on the SV40 and the plasmid DNA contamination that just happened to fall from heaven into the Pfizer vial. What's the chances? And if you don't look for something, you don't find the solution. And that's what doctors are doing now. If they don't acknowledge vaccine injury and they don't acknowledge the science that they've been imparting upon the public whilst calling it a vaccine, just impossible. You can't deal with these people.
Yeah,
Even doctors saying there's no evidence base. Had an email sent from an old surgery. There's no evidence base for ivermectin. There's no evidence for HCQ, hydroxychloroquine It's a conspiracy theory. And then you only type in ivermectin and cancer or ivermectin and COVID, and you things like the principal study, again, efficacy. And then the doctors, even in 2025, saying to patients in real time, there's no evidence. This is an antiparasitic used in veterinary medicine. So suddenly they're relying on the evidence base that they're quoting and citing, but actually ignoring all the evidence of this ever-evolving catalogue of harm, which is catastrophic what's happened.
And it boils down to what we were talking about, medical degrees and scientific degrees. So in scientific degrees, you get taught how to research. And back in the day, it was trawling and going through things. Yeah. Nowadays, people think doing a Google search and looking at maybe the first 3 or 4 pages is research. They don't realise that Google is owned by BlackRock, the same company that owns all the pharmaceutical companies. It is a shop window for pharmaceutical companies. You can't find any truth on there. So the same with, it depends on how you phrase a question, asking, say, ChatGPT, things like that. Wikipedia, again, is owned. And so these people don't know how to do research. They've lost that skill. They don't know how to do it. Whereas I can tell you that 20 years ago, I finished my PhD in 2003, that all of this stuff was known. Literally, the research group that I was working with, and by the way, my external examiner was Angus Dalgleish. So we were a very small group of people. There were only two teams really working on 2 different things in the UK, and what they were worried about was switching on your body to produce antigens forever and the harmful effects it might have. So was it going to be safe and effective? And when I joined the team, the research had been going on for 10 years, and the product has never got into clinical trials because under scrutiny, it's found out that all the methodologies and everything they did, it never worked. So
one of my famous interviews, I got a banjo, and was when I'm holding up the documents from the Pfizer and Moderna sex submissions from the year before the vaccine comes out, and I read them ad verbatim. I poke my head out the side here, very awkward, but to make the point that I'm reading off the page, and it says, these are not conventional vaccines. They are immunomodulatory gene therapies that will never be brought to market in human beings. And that was 2019. 6 months later, we're giving it to descending age groups, and then went for the kids and pregnant women. Just absolutely insanity. But that sums it up. And then you post that interview out, fully referenced, holding the paper up to the camera, banned permanently from LinkedIn for breaching community guidelines. That's not a red flag to the public when you're holding these documents and reading them ad verbatim. I don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely. Books. Now, like I said about RFK Jr., I got to read all of that. And it's a very well written book, very easy to read. And I've read a number over the years, actually. And I saw like a video recently of the number of books that have been published on the pharmaceutical industry and what they don't tell you and how they do their research, and also injections and vaccines and things like this. So it strikes me that they can't censor books in the same way that they censor social media. Was that one of the reasons why you thought to bring out a book to try and bypass some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the lack of censorship, a bit of it was therapy. So I bought 2 books out. Obviously, you got the one on the background there. The first book I wrote was during a period of insomnia, genuinely just getting up in the middle of the night, troubled by all of this. It's a 3-year process to get me kicked out, and Kangaroo Court doesn't even come close to it, but we'll leave that there. It's ended up with a doctor of 17 years experience and 10 years pretty much at med school, on and off, with the degrees and the masters in between, and 27 years committed, and then being struck off for being, ironically, a danger to the public. I think one of the tabloids called me. One of the reasons for strike off was bringing the profession into disrepute and negatively affecting public confidence in the profession, which is sweet irony. But that said, I took to the poetry book. So I started writing poetry, and they're quite snarky. I've got one called The Doctor's Despair, for which the book's named after. There's one called COVID Cultists, one called Blind Obedience, Pharmakia, and my other one there's one called Maskaholics. I can't remember the last one. Keyboard Warriors, about the trolls. So a kind of cathartic, therapeutic poetry. And then coming back to the book, after the strike off, there was just nowhere to turn to get my story out. The papers told a one-sided whitewash of Dave Cartland's a scumbag. That's it, to summarise. And anyone who knows me knows I'm not a harasser, yet I was found guilty of harassing, which was a very clever way of formulating me calling out doctors. And I'll leave it at that. The rest of it's in the book. But calling somebody out for misinformation, and they're spreading this to big audiences, for example, of pregnant women, saying it was safe and effective long term, that's entitled to be called out. But then playing victim and saying harassment, that's what happened essentially. So the story's told in the book. It's a spontaneous decision, and it takes me really from the beginning of why did I want to become a doctor, the opening chapters. It actually talks through the medical school interview and the questions I was asked and the sort of heartfelt responses that came to me in that moment, and talks about my early career and some of the strange antics pre-pandemic, some of the egos in medicine, some of the characters, some of the narcissists that I used to come into contact with. And then I talk about the pandemic and my kind of initial kind of reservations going along with it, to then the questioning that I had. And then came the disciplinary action from sticking my head above the parapet. It ruffled feathers and started doing podcasts and all the rest of it. And that simply was born out of me working at a surgery that privately said to me, off record, we're not going to vaccinate 17 to 12-year-olds because there's no clinical rationale for it. 17 and unders don't get sick. In fact, anyone without any comorbidity or anyone under 70, 80, I'd argue, didn't need it. And they promised, absolutely, we're not going to jab our own children, was the exact word used. The very next day, they didn't even give it a week. They're advertising the jab centre, saying take your 17 to 12-year-olds down to the big, what I call the jabatoire, I called it. Yeah. People would queue up and they take their children, and the people giving the jab had refused either more jabs themselves or refused to give them to that cohort in their own personal family. That was it then. I resigned. The podcast started happening, and then the GMC letters started dropping in, 250 all told over a 3-year period. And I was struck off in the end for harassment, inverted commas, and secondly, writing 5 vaccine exemptions for people to honour their bodily autonomy and to follow the principle from behind you, do no harm. That was what I put in the letters. GMC had no copies of the letters. GMC said I broke international law and flouted policy, couldn't quote the policy or the law. I was found guilty. And then they twisted it and said Dr. Cartland falsified medical notes for money. None of that sentence is true. I never took money. I didn't falsify notes, but read the BBC's version. I'm dishonest because I falsified notes. So that's why the background tells the story of what my aim was. Firstly, I had one of these damn vaccines, 2 of these damn vaccines, jabs, injections, call them what you like. As I was going, I was watching the BBC at the time. I was completely apathetic towards it, really. And then the harm started happening. So as you can see, the graphic is a poison dart. And as you can see, doctors being erased from my title. It will never be erased because they won't take that off me. But the most important message of the whole book is do no harm. And I remind my colleagues of that when they go to work each day. They get their scrubs on and their stethoscopes around the neck. And I just ask them to think about what they're doing that day. Why did they get out of bed to put their scrubs on and their stethoscope on if they intend to ignore harm and gaslight people that need their help and assistance? And that's what encouraged the book, really. And there's a bit of science in there as well. I talk about my correspondence to the GMC and my correspondence to what they call the NHS PAG group. So when I'd started to get rumblings of discontent about my behaviour and dissent, they'd asked me to present how I got to the conclusion. And I've written, one of the whole chapters is my response to that letter. Firstly, I had a disciplinary hearing, and that led to me writing a written position. Never heard from them again. I'll put, and you'll read it for yourself. It's in the book. It's a robust, thorough, evidence-based, fully referenced position of how I went from being jabbed twice, poisoned twice, to not, and everything in between. And then you don't hear from them again. I just find that utterly bizarre. And so it was a bit of a kangaroo court. I'll let people judge for themselves in the book.
And so I think the book is a really important read for people that want to see actual words coming out of Dave's mouth rather than... We now know that mainstream media is the mouthpiece for global corporations, that they're allowed to say things that aren't true, and then they just say, oh, we just did it for our journalistic or whatever. And one of the key ones is about dying from and dying with COVID. Clearly, when you went to the government website, it said with, it told you all the little tricks that they did. If you had an injection on day 1, but you died from 10 days later, you'd be classed as unvaccinated, even if it was your 3rd vaccine. So there's all sorts of tricks being done. But the media took that and deliberately misled people as to what the actual said. And most people can't read data. They've done flipping masters and PhD statistics things.
Oh, doctors don't do that now, Joe, do they? So if you have a basic conversation about the government's claims on things like efficacy, So they were using things like relative risk reduction, not absolute risk reduction. So minuscule absolute risk reductions by having a jab, which was falsified information anyway, because
Yeah.
if you look at the trials, the jab did worse on many things, and then they unblinded and all the rest of it, and different processes used for what actually went in people's arms. So the whole thing was an absolute shambles, really.
Dave, do you remember doing statistics at this high level? And it was it was traumatizing, wasn't it? It was trauma. But all that trauma has set us well for now, right? Because now we can read this data, but it's not easy statistical data to do. And even if somebody does provide some kind of statistical result, right? My problem with big trials is you're not there on the ground. And unless you've actually been there, you don't really know how these cohorts have been set up, especially these big trials and big data. So there's a lot of manipulation that can happen. And just because a
Yeah.
paper's published, even with the right results, the only way anybody knows is when somebody independent recreates the study. That it has to be. You can't just tell just because somebody's written it down. Anyone can write anything. Nobody, this is right, nobody checks people's lab books and
Yeah.
audits them. They're supposed to do this in pharmaceutical companies, but when was the last time that it was audited by independent people? And I don't mean nice and all that kind of stuff. When is everyone auditing this? When was anyone auditing the PCR labs?
Just for your audience, the testing is one thing, completely fraudulent. Anyone with half a brain can see that. But I'll just develop that point I made about absolute and relative risk reduction.
Yeah.
So the claim from the government would be 100% efficacy of the vaccine or near to. But what they're doing, I just to name random figures, is you've got a control group in any trial and you've got the drug and you compare the outcomes. So we just make it easy. So the control group's outcome is 0.001 and the benefit is 0.002 in the drug group. So they can then say the difference between 0.001 and 0.002 is 100% benefit in absolute terms, in relative terms, should I say, rather than it just being a 0.001 minuscule zero, not even to mention really benefit. And so that's what they do. It's complete fraud, twisting of facts and misleading deliberately. The testing was the same. There's little plastic tests. I remember getting the first batch in and the doctors were saying these are rubbish, aren't they? They're rubbish. You could run them under a tap and they'd be predestined to be positive in some cases. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah,
PCR is useless for detecting live virus,
absolutely.
particularly run at the threshold, cycle thresholds that they were running them at.
And I'm sure we could talk about the science of virology now that we've done our research since then. There's a lot that we weren't taught about the papers are there, they're out there and they're published. It's just, they're just not taught in the classes. Because I think, you see, let's give some credit. Academics and medical staff are under a lot of pressure. They're under a lot of pressure, time pressure, push time. People don't have time to think. And people invest so much time and money into their degrees that if you then don't go into something using that degree, you are now in a huge amount of debt. But even on a time, like doctors don't have time to research many of these things. What they're certain of is actually, all I can be certain of is if I follow the regulations, I can't be done for anything because all I've done is followed the regulations. But I don't think this in the end won't stand up in law or in the legal system even. They're not allowed to say, I just didn't have time. They told me to do it, so I thought it was fine. That doesn't wash.
I'm just following orders doesn't wash, and it didn't in the Nuremberg trial. So there we go.
It's
Just
not going to do it
a
now.
nod to that. So yeah, it's mad, really, when you think, isn't it, that these people don't realise now, and not only what's happened in the 5 years, but that they're being replaced by AI for starters. You know, I
Yeah.
get a lot of people come to me through health coaching now. They've sacked their doctor off. They totally don't trust them. They come to me because I've been struck off and stood up, and they've got their prepped AI sheets, and I'll tell you, they're really good, absolutely superb. They give you the full breakdown of what to expect from every test and almost too detailed in some respects. But people have given up and the doctors are being replaced not only by what I call doctors. So you've got all these characters running around surgeries now that have got stethoscopes and look like doctors, but they're certainly not. They've done a diploma for a year or 2 years and they call themselves a physician's associate and play
Oh, I didn't know
doctors like a
that.
costume drama. And these guys are running around. And so we talked about academics and their lack of critical thinking if they enter the world of medicine. But these guys, they wouldn't know a statistic if it jumped up and bit them. Certainly wouldn't have thought about looking at conflicts of interests. I've been asked by a qualified PA how to examine an abdomen and what was wrong with the person's ear when it was earwax. And these are the characters that they're sitting in doctors' chairs now. So they're being replaced, doctors are. And I understand having come out the other end, because you get typecast. I've spent all those 27 years I've just mentioned being a doctor, and a damn good doctor, I'm going to say that, only to then be told that you can't anymore. So I don't know what to do with my life now.
I was just about to ask you that. What's next for you? In fact, there's two questions. One, how have you coped? What have you done to help your mental health during this time? Because you must be extremely resilient to have gone through what you've done. Have you got any tips and tricks for people out there, Dave?
I might give the veneer of being calm. I'll just let you know I've got a delivery just come in typically in the middle of a podcast. So I'm going to just I'll try and mute as and when I can. They're delivering my copy of the poetry book, actually. But yeah, I do a lot of walking around. I do a lot of writing, reading, relaxing. Mindfulness is one of the things I try my best to practice. Lots of dog walking. Yeah, it's affected me. I'm not going to lie. There's been blips along the way after the strike off. I didn't get out of bed for a month. I've been wound licking, but I'm coming out of that now and starting to think, don't get mad, get even, my barrister said in the GMC. So I'm going to get this book. It's already hit #1 in various segments of the Amazon categories. And if I've got one of these books on everyone's Christmas list, I'll be absolutely delighted.
Great. That's like a proactive way to work. And Dave, if you want to collaborate on anything, let me know. I think detox, it isn't just injections that are out there. We need to detox from our environments, and the tap water is something else I'm talking. There's a whole load of stuff. But even though all this stuff has happened, I'm feeling pretty healthy now because I've walked away from all of that stuff. So it's such a testament. And I bring people on all the time that have gone into alternative, not the original medicine, it's not the alternative, it's the petroleum-based industry medicine that's the alternative. So if you want to collaborate on anything, Dave, then let me know. And my final question to you is, what advice would you give anybody listening to this now, whatever place of work, whether they're a medical person or whatever, and they can see that something isn't right? Is there anything you would have done differently, perhaps taken more evidence or things like that before this, that happens? What advice would you give people?
The two parts to that question, really. My gut instinct for the answer to the first part is ask them what they're going to tell their children and grandchildren. What did you do when you realise? You just mentioned the toxicity of the world. It goes further than pharmakeia. It goes into water, chemtrails, in the meat. We've just had bovar incidents, haven't we, feeding the animals with this stuff to stop climate change due to cow fart. So just when you have that realization, and there's many people coming over to the dark side now and realizing that, just if you're not, or if you're thinking about your pension that won't exist or your career that's being replaced, then you've got to tell your children and your grandchildren what your role was in this. Why didn't you do what Dave Cartland did? Why didn't you do what Dan Armstrong or Mohammed Adil or Sarah Mayo and McCluskey did? They risked it all. They lost their careers. So that was the first part of the question. Would I do anything differently? Oh, my wife every day says, I wish she never said anything. I couldn't have slept. I couldn't have slept. I couldn't have lived. I couldn't have, with good conscience, lived my life knowing that I'd kept quiet. Maybe it's not like I didn't try the conventional ways of going to my surgery and saying, look, I'm seeing this. I even did audits, tried to present it. I've offered to give presentations to my locality to do spike protein detoxes. I've offered my time free to give a short lecture, 20 minutes in a coffee room for free. I've offered even to work for free before I was struck off at places that had critical incidences. So I've tried my best, but it then came down to being a lone wolf and just getting the story out in the best way possible, which was writing Substacks, doing interviews. Social media has been a big tool. If you look at the following for a crazy old lunatic tin hat wearing conspiracy theorist, I've got a lot of support online and lots of positivity. I've also got a very committed group of evil trolls that try and bully me and harass me every day of the week. For all the positives, there's a mini negative. But yeah, I don't think I would do anything different, Joe. I really don't, because I've got kids and those kids will have grandkids. And hopefully the people had Jeremy Vine post about me the other day saying your legacy to your kids will be you're struck off bully and harassing people. Actually, if anyone spends half an hour in my book, you'll hear that about this guy that actually is none of those things. None of my friends think I'm a bully or a harasser. And it's just not in me. And people are quite surprised when they read these headlines about this guy. Anyone watching this interview, I hope, sees that just a nice family guy that cares for his patients and took a sacrifice of his 100 grand a year career, earning fractions of that now. So yeah, no, I wouldn't do anything differently, Joe. Maybe I would have pushed the academic approach a little bit more, but it just got me angry that they were going for kids, pregnant women.
Yeah.
They were ignoring. I'm going into the room saying, I'm seeing 3-4 vaccine injuries a day, guys. Are you seeing that? I've only seen 40 patients today. Like 3 or 4 of them claim that they're injured from this jab. And
Yeah.
they're just like, no, we're not seeing it. No, you're just pinning everything on the vaccine. Correlation isn't causation.
They,
So I've had people having reactions the day after a vaccine, and these idiots who are saying correlation isn't causation, they're the ones calling it long COVID.
yeah,
No
that's a
diagnostic criteria.
it's long COVID.
A fanfare of symptoms, miscellaneous symptoms, all long COVID. They
Yeah,
were happy to say that, but not that the vaccine the day before causing a stroke is anything to do with the vaccine. So
yeah.
I keep saying the V word. I'm sorry.
The cat is well out of the bag now. I think based on what I've seen over these, Victoria Rickson and you and my experience, Dr. Adel, etc. My advice to people now, retrospectively, is before you say anything, come and reach out to some of these whistleblowers. Because one, you need to know what their tactics are going to be because they will have tactics because this is about money and they can't side with you because of money. And whether it's a health and safety concern, something to do with the drug, or whether it's to do with polluting the rivers or whatever, it's about money. But you won't sleep at night. Now that you know you've been woken up to whatever it is, you're going to have to do something. And walking away, this will haunt you forever. It'll keep coming back. So you have to do something. But just accept that your life is not going to be the same anymore. And what you need to do is to protect yourself, but also do the right thing. And if you speak to some else that have gone through this kind of experience, you'll see the tactics then. You'll know what to expect. And it won't be a surprise when they lie and when they do this and when they do that and when they do the other. You'll see many whistleblowers out there. So if this is you, what I would suggest you do before you do anything is go and speak to people to find out what the tactics are and start getting a game plan
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
because they have very underhanded things. You can't believe they do it, but this is a
Oh,
lot of money
I've
involved.
seen. I would never have believed it. I said at the beginning about the Wakefielding that they threaten you of.
Yeah.
It's true. There's no aspect of my life that they've not gone after. Like I say, they've contacted all personal friends, family, neighbours, colleagues.
Mm.
Like I say, these anonymous calls going in. Even on the last day I worked as a doctor, I was released from the role. I've been running this surgery pretty much single-handedly because guess what? All the doctors are off sick. They get a phone call from two anonymous male voices saying, just to let you know, Dr. Cartland's a bully and a harasser who's about to be struck off. I've been very open and honest with the staff there. In
Mm.
fact, I've pulled up the GMC complaint and gone through it and explained it. But unfortunately, they were threatened with media, CQC, ruffling feathers locally. And so they sent me an email, the coward's way out on the evening. We don't want the controversy. For your mental health, we're going to let you go from the role, and just hung me out to dry. So that sort of sums up the cowardice. Can't even pick up the phone and say, Dave, look, this has happened. And as soon as you've been struck off, everything gets taken. Your NHS mail goes. I've not heard from a doctor in terms of any ex-colleague or NHS staff. Just sad, isn't it?
It's all going to come out because the public, I think, are way ahead. This is what I couldn't understand. The public are ahead of the medical establishment on many things now. And like you say, they're coming with their information. And this is it's only going to get
I
more.
had academic conversations with my Morrison's delivery driver, my window cleaner, the gardener who did our garden in the summer. He knew it all. He knew the papers. It doesn't take a lot of digging, respectfully. And these guys are getting it when you get blank faces from the doctors. But also the other thing to worry about is there's a group of people now. There's the original, I don't know, red pillars, is it blue pill, red pill in Matrix? But you've got the middle group ever expanding, realizing with each paper, with each Daily Mail article, they're starting to bring one or two out. There's even a doctor the other day that had transverse myelitis, screaming that from the rooftops at the beginning.
Yeah.
This transverse myelitis, of course, because you're taking a pro-inflammatory, immunologically stimulating spike protein, and it's going to obviously cause everything to inflame and autoimmunity at the
It's not
center of
rocket
all.
science. It's really
Not
not
rocket
rocket
science. I
science.
say it really slowly. I say human cell making non-human antigen. The human immune system is trained to kill it, to stop it from happening. So when you're making this spike protein as per the gene sequences that were given to the vaccine companies, then you're producing this non-human antigen incessantly. For how
It's
long, no one knows. It's not
inflammation
rocket
forever.
science.
It's not rocket science. It's immunology 101 that you learn on day one. Literally it is, which is
Well, I blow
oh
their minds when I get into like immune class switching, IgG4 class switching, and
yeah,
immune escape variants, and you get glazed looks like you're talking in German to them.
I know. Oh, I specialised in the complement cascade,
Yeah.
which is that
Some
is
doctors don't even know what the complement cascade is.
cascade is.
They haven't done a lecture in it.
When I first of all did that, when I studied it like my undergraduate degree, I thought this is like the most complicated thing I've ever heard. If you've ever heard of brain surgery or rocket science, I reckon the complement cascade of immunology is probably worse than that. It's harder than that. So it's very complicated, the immune system. You can't teach someone in 2 hours or 2 weeks or whatever. And this is where we have to have mutual respect, cross collaboration, and people need to please stop taking orders because it's going to come down to you. It's going to come down to you, and this is not over. This is just the start, right?
I would have felt sorry for them about 3 years ago. As you mentioned, they kept busy deliberately. The last thing you want to do when you've had a day seeing 40 patients and having to self-catheterize at lunchtime is to come home and read the Lancet Journal or the Korean study on early myocarditis damage. And
Yeah, man.
luckily, I was doing a 2-day week at the time, so I had time to
Exactly.
digest it. But
But
no,
now
it's
there's
like that.
no
I
excuse.
agree.
So thank you very much for coming on, Dave. I wish you very much luck, and if we can collaborate on making the country healthier by showing them the things that we wish we would have known right years ago.
I
Very
throw in a
confident that
cheesy flash of the book. So yeah, this will make their health better.
this will
Reading the
make the health better.
story.
The
Yeah,
first rule of making your health better is don't put poisons in your body. That's what I say. That's the number one thing. Stop putting crap in because you'll feel a lot better.
yeah.
Then we can work on from there. So please do get
Amazing.
this book. And for those of you sitting on the shelf, you do deserve sitting on the shelf, sitting on the fence. That's right.
Forgive the
In
pun.
between, you
These
deserve
books
to
aren't
see
staying on the shelf.
you, you deserve to see both sides, but a lot of people will really support you, Dave, in this because you really helped us as a movement, as a community, say, look, it is also the doctors. They are seeing this because you weren't the only person seeing this. So please support Dave. That's his new book.
My
Nothing
dream is to
poetry.
get everyone buying 10 copies and send them to all their friends queuing up for the latest boosting booster.
Yes,
It's
this is
very, very gentle. I'll say that the feedback early has been it's very conversational,
good.
personal touches, emotive, and it's not conspiratorial. It's my story. And so
Yeah,
that's powerful.
there's nothing about this that says about conspiracies. It's just about these are facts. So that's brilliant, Dave. Thank you very much for that. It's going to be a powerful tool for us, and I'm sure some people will be taking you up on that offer. So you can find it on Amazon, but other good sites. If you, I just did a search for your name, Dave, and do no harm and
Yeah,
diaries of
put my name
vaccination.
and do no harm because if you just put my name into Google, it's not pretty.
That's
I
why you
wouldn't
want to buy the
employ
book.
me.
That's why you want to buy the book. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to the Crystal Water Experience podcast. You've been listening to Dr. Dave Cartland, a hero, and we are very grateful to have him on. And every week I bring on somebody else who is a subject matter expert in things that are not mainstream to give you information that you wouldn't ordinarily get. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you to you, Dave.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.